When Chief Justice John Roberts walked into that hearing, he carried himself like a man who thought he'd seen it all. Calm, polished, confident, the kind of presence that says, "I've been here before, and I know how this game is played." But what he didn't expect was to be caught off guard in front of the cameras, in a room so quiet it almost hummed. The kind of silence that doesn't soothe you, it warns you. On the surface, this was just another congressional hearing. But everyone there felt something different in the air. This wasn't about lofty legal theory. This was about the one subject that makes even the most powerful judges uncomfortable: ethics. For weeks, the court had been under fire. Questions about impartiality, about gifts, about connections that somehow slipped past disclosure forms. The American public was watching. And this time, Roberts wasn't protected by the black robe. He was just a man at a table, answering to elected officials. One by one, members of Congress took their turns. Some went easy, others tried to land a few jabs without looking too aggressive. Roberts handled it all with the same practiced rhythm: speak just enough, never lose your cool, keep control of the tempo. And then her name was called. Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas. She leaned into the microphone, not with fire or volume, but with the steady confidence of someone who knew she didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Crockett wasn't there for show. She wasn't looking for approval. She was there for accountability. Some in the room thought Roberts would brush her off the way powerful men sometimes do, with that half-smile, that mix of patience and condescension. And yes, he tried. But then Crockett did something that made everyone sit up. She turned his own words back on him. And in that moment, the silence in room 2141 shifted. Roberts wasn't in control anymore. The Chief Justice of the United States, a man used to having the last word, suddenly had none. Crockett leaned forward, her voice steady. "Chief Justice, you've said before that the court holds itself to a strict ethical standard, even without a formal code. Is that right?" Roberts folded his hands, calm as ever. "That's correct, Congresswoman. The justices follow long-standing traditions that guide judicial conduct." She gave a small nod, then turned a page in her folder. "All right then, help me understand this. If that's true, why was there no disclosure about Justice Merritt's connection to a political donor, a donor whose case landed in front of this court just last year?" That cut through the air like a blade. A ripple moved through the room. Cameras snapped. People shifted in their seats. Robert's easy smile was gone. He tugged slightly at his tie. "I can't comment on ongoing reviews or the conduct of any particular justice." Crockett didn't let him off the hook. "But you can speak to precedent, can't you?" "Yes," Roberts replied carefully. "Good. Because precedent says it's not just about whether something is wrong. It's also about whether it looks wrong. The appearance of impropriety, isn't that the standard?" Roberts adjusted in his chair. "That principle has guided many institutions, yes." She didn't wait. "Then tell me, wouldn't failing to disclose a close relationship with someone who profits directly from a court decision appear improper?" The room was silent. She hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. Roberts spoke slowly, choosing each word. "Congresswoman, I believe we're venturing into hypotheticals." She didn't blink. "I'm not dealing in hypotheticals. I'm citing your court's own financial records." Now the tension was thick enough to touch. Roberts leaned forward, one hand resting on the polished table. His expression stayed cool, practiced. But Crockett pressed again, her tone even more deliberate. "I'm quoting directly from disclosure forms filed by your court. Chief Justice, do you personally check that these forms are accurate?" A pause. Short, but heavy. "There is a system in place," Roberts said at last. "Each justice is responsible for their own disclosures." Crockett sat back slowly. No smile, no grand gesture. Just a single word, dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. "Interesting." Crockett leaned in, her voice steady but cutting. "Where I come from, if you're in charge of policing yourself, that's not accountability. That's just grading your own homework." A few people in the gallery exchanged glances. One staffer let out a quick exhale, half laugh, half disbelief. Roberts tried to steer things back. "Congresswoman, The judiciary was built to operate independently from the other branches. Our role is to interpret the law, not bow to political pressure." Crockett shook her head slightly. "No one here is asking you to bow. We're asking why these same patterns keep repeating, and why nothing ever seems to stop them." Roberts opened his mouth to respond, but she lifted her hand, not rudely, but firmly, as if to say, "Wait, I'm not finished." "I spent years in courtrooms across Texas," she said. "I watched judges lecture young men, black, brown, white, didn't matter, about responsibility. About how even the appearance of dishonesty could destroy their lives. So forgive me if I don't accept that the highest court in the land should be held to a lower standard." Roberts shifted again, the smallest adjustment of posture, but noticeable. "I do understand your concern, Congresswoman. But the court has always taken these matters seriously. We conduct internal reviews. We act with integrity." That's when she cut in, sharp as glass. "You have no binding code. And your only review comes from inside your own walls. That's like asking the fox to write the security plan for the henhouse." This time, the room reacted. A low murmur rippled through the back. Cameras clicked faster. Reporters leaned forward. Crockett wasn't grandstanding. She was locking him in. Roberts inhaled slowly, his fingers pressing into the polished edge of the table. He was still composed, but the air had shifted. His answers now carried the weight of someone who realized he was on thinner ice than he'd expected. "The court is not above criticism," he said carefully. "But I would remind the Congresswoman that mutual respect between co-equal branches is essential." Crockett's eyes flickered, the briefest flash of frustration. Not because she was faltering, but because she knew exactly what was happening. The word respect wasn't about principle. It was being used as a shield. "I respect the court," she said. "I respect what it's supposed to stand for. But respect without honesty? That's just decoration. And the people who elected me didn't send me here to admire your robe. They sent me here to ask why the rules always seem to change depending on who's wearing it." Roberts studied her more carefully now. The shift was subtle but clear. He wasn't looking at a freshman lawmaker anymore. He was looking at an opponent who had come armed with facts, precision, and a refusal to be brushed aside. And the truth? She was only just getting started. The next file in Jasmine Crockett's folder didn't look like much, just a few thin pages, stapled at the corner. But when she slid one of them forward on the desk, the whole room seemed to lean in. It wasn't the kind of evidence that makes a loud sound when it drops. It was the kind that makes people stop breathing for a second. She adjusted the mic. "Chief Justice, are you familiar with Dalton versus Mason County, decided by the Fifth Circuit back in 2009? Robert squinted, not in confusion but in calculation. "Vaguely. If I recall, that was a procedural ruling on judicial recusal." "You don't recall correctly," Crockett cut in. "It was about a judge who failed to recuse himself even though he had indirect financial ties to one of the law firms in the case. The ruling made it clear. The appearance of impropriety alone was enough grounds for removal." She tapped the edge of the paper, her voice steady. "And yet, just last year, Justice Harlan took part in Macon versus Delta Rail, a case where his longtime friend and financial backer stood to gain millions from the outcome. No recusal. No explanation. No disclosure. And the ruling came down 5-4. The room shifted. A few heads turned. A pen slipped from someone's hand and clattered to the floor. Roberts exhaled slowly. "Congresswoman, I am not here to litigate individual cases." "I'm not asking you to," she said firmly. "I'm asking how a court that claims to stand for fairness expects the American people to believe in it when decisions start to look less like justice and more like favors for friends." That landed. Not like a punch, more like a scalpel, cutting right where it hurt. There were small gasps. A murmur. Reporters leaned in closer. Roberts shifted into the mic. "Your language is inflammatory." "And your silence," Crockett replied, calm and sharp, "has been even worse." She let the words hang before continuing. "In my district, there's a woman named Carla Jennings. Single mom. Worked night shifts at a hospital for 20 years. Her son was denied financial aid because of a clerical error that wrongly flagged her for back taxes. She appealed. She fought. She begged the system to see her. And in the end, she was told, tough luck. Crockett locked her eyes on Roberts. But when a billionaire with private ties to a sitting justice files a case, the court clears the calendar. In less than 4 months, arguments are heard, decisions are made, and somehow, those decisions always seem to lean in his favor. Roberts' jaw tightened. His hands clasped together just a little too firmly. He hadn't expected this. Not from her. The court, he said carefully, has limited resources. We make difficult choices about which cases to hear. That does not imply favoritism. Crockett didn't blink. But perception matters. Doesn't it, Chief Justice? He didn't answer. She leaned in. Does perception matter? Finally, he gave the faintest nod. Of course. Crockett lowered her voice, steady as stone. Then I suggest you start caring a lot more about what the American people are seeing. Because right now, they're not seeing justice. They're seeing power protecting power. Silence. Heavy. Total. The kind that no one in that room would forget. For the first time that day, Chief Justice Roberts had no response. The room went still. Even the committee chair stayed quiet. Nobody wanted to cut into what was beginning to feel like a historic exchange. And Crockett, she didn't need to raise her voice. She simply turned another page in her folder. I came here today with respect, she said. But I also came with facts. And the facts are clear. Your institution has a problem, a deep one. And it's time someone stopped pretending otherwise. That's when the shift happened. Subtle, but undeniable. Roberts leaned forward, folding his hands again, trying to project calm. But his voice carried less certainty now, less command than before. Congresswoman, he began carefully, while I respect your passion, I would caution against drawing broad conclusions from isolated cases without understanding the full judicial process. Crockett didn't blink. With all due respect, Chief Justice, I'm not drawing conclusions. I'm drawing connections. And there's a difference. The air in the room tilted. You could feel it. The eyes weren't on Roberts anymore. They were on her. That's when she made her move. She held up another document. In 2013, you gave a commencement speech at Harvard Law, she reminded him. You told the graduates, and I quote, your credibility is your currency. The moment people stop believing in your integrity, everything else collapses. Roberts leaned back, trying to recover some ground. That is correct. Then tell me, she pressed, her voice sharp but steady, how does credibility survive when public trust in your court is at its lowest point in decades? When polls show most Americans believe the court is driven more by politics than by principle. Roberts hesitated. The pause said more than words could. Crockett pressed harder. You don't get to spend 20 years building a reputation and then act surprised when silence about your colleagues starts tearing it apart. He opened his mouth to answer, but she didn't give him the chance. You call this passion? It isn't. It's precision. I'm not yelling. I'm not speculating. I'm asking why people like Carla Jennings are held to standards your justices can ignore, in plain sight. Her voice dropped, firmer now, every word carrying weight. Do you know what it's like to walk into a courtroom already knowing the scales are tilted against you? I do. I've watched young men, from every background, stand before a judge who told them that even the appearance of dishonesty could ruin their lives. And now here I sit, watching the highest court in the nation dismiss that same principle when it's their turn to be held accountable. The silence that followed was heavier than anything yet. Crockett's words cut through the silence. I've seen men cry after sentencing, not because they were guilty, but because they knew they never had a real shot. Because in those rooms, justice wasn't about truth. It was about who had access, who had ties, who had time. The stillness in the chamber grew thick. No whispers, no camera clicks, just her voice, steady and unbroken. Roberts tried to break back in. The court has taken steps. Not enough, she cut him off. Not when billionaires fly justices to private resorts and no one blinks. Not when decisions that change millions of lives are written behind doors no ordinary citizen can knock on. And then she said it. You're right about one thing, Chief Justice. Credibility is currency. And right now, your court is in overdraft. That line landed like a hammer. A law clerk in the back nearly tore through the page trying to scribble it down. For the first time all morning, Roberts had nothing. No deflection, no polished phrase. Just silence. Crockett let it hang there. One beat. Then she leaned back, calm, steady, unshaken. She wasn't performing. She wasn't looking for a headline. She was saying what no one else had dared, that the nation's highest court had become insulated, selective, untouchable. Roberts smoothed his tie again, but now the gesture looked more nervous than confident. The committee chair cleared his throat, ready to move on, but even he hesitated, like he wasn't sure how to follow what had just happened. But Crockett wasn't done. Not yet. Not until the American people were part of the conversation too. She took a breath, shifted her tone. Less like cross-examination, more like a kitchen table talk. "There's a man in Odessa," she began, named Jorge Salgado. "Drives trucks. Worked straight through the pandemic. Didn't complain. Didn't take a single day off. But when his brother was detained in a private immigration facility and denied medical care, Jorge filed a petition. Begged the courts to hear it. And you know what he got? A one-line denial. No hearing. No explanation." She looked straight at Roberts. "He asked me why. Why the system wouldn't even listen. And I told him the truth, because the law was written that way. Because the system protects itself before it protects people like him. And your court, the highest court in the land, had a chance to change that. To hear his case. To give him a shred of hope. And you refused. No explanation. No statement. Nothing." Roberts stayed silent. "These aren't hypotheticals, Chief Justice," Crockett said, her voice firm but heavy with purpose. "These are people. Real people who still believe, somehow, that justice belongs to them too." She didn't just look at Roberts anymore, she looked at the entire room. There are people out there who still believe in the promise of this system. They follow the rules, work themselves to the bone, and trust that if they do everything right, justice will eventually find them. But what happens when they stop believing? What happens when they realize the law only seems to listen to the wealthy, the powerful, and the well-connected? Her voice carried a weight that wasn't anger or theater, it was honesty. She paused, letting it sit before she went on. "I became a lawyer because I believed the law could bring fairness. I stayed one because I learned the truth. The law is only as fair as the people in charge of it. And right now, I'm looking at someone who holds more power than most of us will ever touch, yet refuses to admit how dangerous unchecked power can be." Roberts finally spoke, calm but firm. "Congresswoman, I don't deny our decisions can be difficult. But the court's role isn't to rescue people. It's to apply the law as it is written." Crockett leaned in slightly. "And what if that law is written to protect the few? What if it's interpreted in ways that always keep those at the top right where they are?" She didn't wait for his answer. She knew it wouldn't come. "You call it judicial independence. But independence without accountability isn't strength, it's isolation." Somewhere in the back of the room, a single voice whispered, "She's right." Not for show, not for applause, just someone saying what many were already thinking. Crockett slid one last page across the table. "This isn't about party lines. It's about principle. It's about telling people like Jorge and Carla that their lives don't disappear once they step outside your courtroom. Their stories still matter." Her eyes swept across the chamber. "Because if this court won't answer to the people, then it's on us to start asking harder, louder questions." The camera caught Robert's face, expressionless now, no smile, no shield. Crockett gave him one last look. "I didn't come here to embarrass you. I came here to remind you what's at stake." She didn't come to impress anyone with fancy words or political tradition. She came to remind them what justice really means. People, not titles. Real people, waiting for someone in power to finally care. When she finished, the room froze. No chatter, no shuffling, no typing. Even the reporters dropped their hands from the keyboard. The silence had weight to it. And in that stillness, something shifted. Even Chief Justice Roberts, who had been sitting tall and steady all afternoon, felt it. His polished tone and old-school legal playbook weren't enough this time. Not against her. Crockett closed her folder slowly, folded her hands, and spoke in a softer, almost personal voice. "You know," she said, "when I was growing up in St. Louis, there was this retired Army judge, tough as stone. He used to tell me, a courtroom is only as honest as the people brave enough to question it. I think about that a lot." Her words didn't come with applause. They didn't need it. They sank into the room like something permanent. Across the table, even a veteran congressman, Leonard Franks, usually silent, leaned toward his mic and whispered, "Damn." It wasn't politics. It was respect. Crockett didn't smile. She didn't look for praise. She wasn't there for that. The chairman, who normally moved things along with ease, spoke slower than usual. "The committee thanks Representative Crockett." His voice carried caution, like he didn't want to break what had just happened. Roberts reached for his glass of water, but his hand shook, just a little. She noticed, and she met his eyes. "You don't have to agree with me, Chief Justice," she said. "But you heard me. That's all I came for." There was no ego in it, no victory lap. Just truth, unpolished and impossible to ignore. After that, the rest of the questions from other members sounded different. Less show, more substance. Even Roberts himself changed. His answers got shorter, sharper, more grounded. The performance was over. Now it was real. Clips of the exchange were already everywhere. By the time the hearing was halfway through, people who had never cared about judicial ethics were glued to their phones. In a coffee shop near the Capitol, a barista stopped pouring milk into a latte just to replay one of Crockett's lines. In a Dallas classroom, a little black girl tugged her teacher's sleeve and asked, "Is she a lawyer?" And across the country, families who had long given up on the system felt something unexpected. Representation that didn't bend, didn't soften, didn't apologize. Back inside room 2141, Justice Roberts lifted his eyes toward Crockett again. The first glance had carried that polished weight of superiority. This one didn't. It wasn't defeat on his face, but something quieter, recognition. She wasn't a rising star, wasn't some future voice. She was already here. She was the moment. The hearing tried to slide back into its usual rhythm, but the atmosphere had changed. Everyone who'd been paying attention knew it. What began as another staged, controlled session was now branded by a moment no one could undo. Crockett didn't need to say more. Her silence worked harder than any speech. Her words lingered in the air like a ruling still waiting to be written. 30 minutes later, as the chairman called a recess, the room broke into its usual shuffle. Members stretched, staffers gathered papers, reporters bolted for the exits. Roberts rose to leave. Before turning, he looked at her once more. "Congresswoman," he said, his voice softer than before, "your district is fortunate to have you." Crockett lifted her head, calm but steady. "I know," she replied. It wasn't arrogance, it was certainty. Roberts gave a small nod, less polished, more human, and left. As the chamber thinned out, a young woman from the gallery, a law student from Missouri drowning in a borrowed blazer, stepped carefully toward Crockett. She looked nervous but determined. "I just wanted to." She started speaking, and you could see it in the room. Nobody expected it. "Not like that." A student later said, "I don't think anyone ever talked to them that way. Not for real." Crockett glanced up, adjusted her sleeves, and asked softly, "Talk to them how?" "Like they're not above you," the student replied. And that was it. Crockett gave the smallest smile, not performative, not forced, just real. "They're not," she said. Then she gathered her papers, stood up, and walked out. No victory lap. No dramatic exit. Just calm certainty. By that night, the clip was everywhere. Not just buried on political talk shows, but front and center on primetime news. What caught people off guard wasn't the clash. It was the quietness of it. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't gone for applause. She simply held her ground, and in doing so, taught a lesson. Some commentators rushed to frame it. They called it grandstanding, or a direct challenge to the system. But the people who actually watched the whole thing, not just the sound bites, felt something different. Clarity. For years, Americans were told the Supreme Court was untouchable, sacred, above question. But Crockett had shown, calmly and legally, that even sacred institutions need accountability. Because power unchecked isn't stability. It's decay. And maybe, just maybe, that little jolt of discomfort in that hearing room was exactly what justice required. Because here's the truth, real change doesn't always come with banners and chants. Sometimes it comes quietly, through one steady voice that refuses to bend, even when power stares it down. And if Jasmine Crockett could sit across from the Chief Justice of the United States and speak her truth, then maybe you and I can do the same, in our towns, our workplaces, even our own homes. Moments like that don't just belong to the people in the room. They belong to all of us. If this story moved you, make sure you subscribe. Because this is just the beginning, and we're not done yet.